A few years ago, I was renting a house in North California. The neighborhood was just outside the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough not to feel isolated. The area had no streetlights, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moonlight. It didn't bother me though, it made my little house feel even more quaint on darker nights. I got home from work one day in mid-fall. It was a cloudy night, so pulling up to my house, I only saw what my headlights and front porch lights illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. That was odd, as I had never smelled that before around that house. I didn't see anybody nearby, so I ignored it and went inside. I had just got off a shift with a few hours of overtime, so I felt pretty tired. Even though it wasn't even 7 yet, I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up sometime later, sure that I heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away because my friend would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work on his way to his night classes. I even gave him a spare key so he could stop by even if I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from my phone screen and number pad blinded me. These were the days before phones had light sensor that would dim the screen in the dark, and this particular phone was so bright I could use it as a flashlight. Through squinted eyes I could make out that it was 9 something, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread text or anything. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There were a couple seconds of silence before I heard loud footfalls as someone started running through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt out of my bed and ran to the closet. They were already up the stairs by the time I opened the door and stepped inside. The house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one I was in, and a spare, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in the house thunder down the hallway past my door and into the bathroom. Thank God he did. That gave me enough time to open the attic in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I had just started to lift myself up when the person ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside of the attic when the bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room and stop. When they didn't see me in the room, they ran back to the hallway and into the other room, which I had just boxes stacked in a corner, some weights, and a table where I pointed my miniature models. I guess they decided if someone was hiding, it would be in the bedroom because they charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I had crouched in my attic just a foot or so away from the axis, so I could try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was from their knees down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. That scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put in a mental hospital for several mental disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The man in my house ran back downstairs. I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown around and furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic. I had left my cell phone when I ran for the closet, and I wasn't certain I could climb down without him hearing me. After some time, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was the intruder had flipped my bed over, I assume in an attempt to find me. That was the loud noise I had heard after he stepped away from the closet. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by the bed and called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs. The first floor was a mess, but I had expected that. Chairs had been knocked over, the sofa had been flipped. All the books, pictures, knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. The cupboards in the kitchen had been opened and all the boxes and canned food had been thrown to the ground. As far as I could tell though, the only thing missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along my fence line, with some foil and an empty pen tube, which the police said people often used to smoke meth, so they thought he had been watching my house for a while. I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected up the evidence and told me I should stay with my family and friends that night and get that door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved a shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next couple hours cleaning things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine it along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts and foil, but I didn't see anything. The next day I called to have the door fixed and motion lights installed at the back and sides of my house. I ran a phone cable up the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else happened at the house though. I lived there another 3 years without incident. One more precaution I took was practicing getting out of my bed, going to my closet and climbing into the attic as quickly and quietly as possible. I even kept at it when I moved, except now I go to a crawl space at the back of the closet instead of the attic. I try not to think about what would have happened if I had been a bit slower getting to the attic, or if he hadn't gone into the bathroom at the end of the hallway first. When I was 11, my family of 6 decided to make the move from a suburbia to a lovely rural bungalow. I have 3 sisters, aged 9, 12, and 18 at the time. We were all excited for the privacy and isolation of our new home. For once in our lives, we would have no neighbors and a large yard to play in. Our home had large windows, giving us a beautiful view of the farmland around us. My parents disliked curtains because there were no neighbors and they collect dust, so we all figured, what's the point? The summer there was so much fun. Every morning I would get up and take my dog for a walk around the woods in our backyard. I absolutely adored the feeling of being alone and was enjoying the freedom of our new space. Fall eventually rolled around, and I continued my routine of walking my dog, both in the morning and after school. I remember one morning while walking my dog, I began feeling uncomfortable. I was alone in the woods, there was no one around, but I still felt as though I was being watched. I had shivers down my back the entire walk, and for an 11-year-old, I just felt really strange. My dog was acting weird too. I kept trying to go further into the woods, but she kept trying to pull me towards our shed. The shed rested at the very back of our yard, on the edge of the woods where the trees thin out quite a bit. I didn't like how I was feeling, so I picked up my dog and brought her back to the house and went on with my day. Days went by and I just couldn't seem to shake this feeling of being watched, especially when I was in my bedroom, which had a huge window in it that overlooked our backyard. The view of the woods that I had previously loved was beginning to scare me. I assumed it was just because it was fall and the forest started looking kinda gloomy. I started having nightmares about waking up in the middle of the night and seeing the figure of a man in our backyard. Weird things kept happening around our house. We all suddenly noticed that we were eating things like bread a lot quicker. Every morning, half a loaf of bread would be gone, and my parents attributed this to their hungry growing children. One evening, I woke up and heard noises coming from our family kitchen, which was just down the hall from our bedroom. It sounded like someone had come home, and I assumed it was my oldest sister. The only thing that was strange was her footsteps sounded a lot heavier than they usually do. The noise stopped very quickly, and I was able to fall back asleep. In the morning, my mom asked me and my 2 sisters, 9 and 12 years old, if we woke up last night to make food. We all said no, and then I asked if it was my oldest sister. My mom told me that she stayed at her friend's house last night, and then thought it was probably the dog making noise. I was terrified. I knew I heard unfamiliar footsteps. That night, I had a lot of trouble sleeping. I still felt like someone was watching me. Eventually I fell asleep but woke up around 2:30 a.m. I heard noises in the house again. It was the same footsteps I had heard before. I stayed in my bed and felt paralyzed. I rolled over and faced the window, hoping that if someone came into my room, they'd think I was asleep. The noises stopped and I closed my eyes as hard as I could. I told myself I was just imagining things and that monsters aren't real. About an hour must have gone by, and I eventually opened my eyes. When I looked out the window, I swear to God, I could see a man standing in our backyard watching our house. I was terrified enough that I didn't move at all, and eventually fell asleep again. I was so relieved to wake up alive that morning, but was still terrified of our backyard. I ran into the kitchen to tell my mom what I saw, and refused to walk the dog. I'm not sure if she really believed me at the time, or thought I was having night terror hallucinations, which I did quite often when I was younger. I went to school that morning. I was anxious all day. The last thing I wanted to do was go home. When I did get home, I saw police vehicles surrounding the house. They had the dogs with them and were searching our yard. They told us a man who had broken into another home and beaten the couple living there was suspected of being on our property. He stole their wallets, photos, and other small items of value. The biggest thing he stole was their car, which had been ditched 10 kilometers from our home. While searching our property, they found all items from his previous break-ins hidden around our yard. They also discovered that he had been hiding in our shed since his previous break-in. They said he had done this at the previous home prior to breaking in. He would spend his time watching the house and observing the residents' routine until he knew it well enough to start coming inside the house. They said he had a long history of premeditated violence, including child abuse, and believed he was planning on eventually harming us all. In the shed they found wrappers, empty cans of food, and scraps. They told us he was definitely coming into our house for the food during the night. From the shed he had a perfect view of our home and could see when we all went to bed. Although they searched our house and property with the dogs, they didn't find him. After that day, I realized that if you feel like you're being watched, you probably are. This happened when me and my wife got married in the fall. I'll never be so grateful that I have a habit of locking doors. Our wedding day was coming to an end. Family and friends were slowly starting to depart as me and my wife took pictures and chatted with some of the guests who stayed a little longer, and we're just having a great time. It was a great day and a lot of fond memories were made, but what was least expected is what happened that night as we were on our way to our honeymoon. As me and my wife said goodbye to the last of the guests around 9 p.m., we got into the car and headed home. We had our bags packed prior to the wedding day for Cancun and were ready to go. I live in Washington State, and we were in a bit of a hurry because instead of flying out from Seattle Airport in SeaTac like normal people do, it was a lot cheaper for us to drive up north to Canada and fly out from a Canadian airport. Also, me and my wife thought it'd be fun to have a little road trip to Canada and then fly out from Canada to Cancun. Plus, it was only 3.5-hour drive for us, and cheaper, so we headed out. We had a great time driving, blasting music, talking about Cancun, and just being excited about the new chapter in our lives. My wife slowly started to fall asleep, being exhausted from the wedding and whatnot. We were halfway to Canada. At this point, we were no longer in the city area, but more a wooded area with fewer cars and fewer people the more we drove, practically seeing no one on the road. By the time it was 3 a.m., we had some extra time on our hands, and I was starting to fall asleep too, so I pulled over to a gas station to get some Red Bull to keep me awake. I pulled into the gas station that was completely empty and parked the car to see my wife asleep. I told her I'm taking the keys and locking her inside, that I'd be right back. Not sure if you could hear me, but she kind of motioned her hand around like people normally do when they're too tired to care. I come back around 6 minutes later to find my wife shaking and crying. I was confused and freaking out a bit because I wasn't sure why she was crying. She couldn't even get words out at first. Later, when she calmed down, she told me what happened. Apparently, she did hear me when I told her I'd take the keys and be right back, and as she was sleeping, she was awoken by tapping on the driver's side window. Being too tired to get up or even open her eyes, she lazily went for the unlock button on the passenger side of the door. As she was going for it, she froze. A thought passed her mind. Then she remembered. Didn't he say he had the keys? Why would he need me to unlock the door for him? That's when she heard a woman's voice mumbling from the driver's side. She turned herself around to look at the window and saw a woman, long black hair with wide-set eyes, and a crooked smile on her face. She couldn't hear what she was saying at first, but then she heard what she was saying. She kept repeating in a mumbled tone, "Are you tired?" over and over again. She freaked out and told the woman to leave her alone. The woman laughed and told my wife that she was too tired. The woman never took her eyes off her and tried the door handle several times. At this point, my wife was close to tears and attempted to call me, but as she did, she heard what sounded like a phone buzz and realized I left my phone in the car. Out of options, my wife started to honk the horn trying to scare off the woman while also maybe getting my attention. The woman still had her gaze on her and started mumbling more while laughing and trying the door handle again. Then she mentioned something about someone named Sarah and asked my wife if she knew her. After a few more minutes of mumbling, she left. To my wife's words, the minute she left, I came out of the gas station, so my wife broke down. I don't know how I didn't hear the honking of the car, and I still feel bad for leaving my phone in the car. My wife also added that one of the creepier things about that woman is that she didn't look homeless or dirty or anything. In fact, she seemed normal and well kept. My wife says she'll never forget the woman's wide-set eyes and the gaze she had on her with that smile. It also chills me to think what would have happened if my wife never realized that I had the keys, or if she never heard me about locking her inside and opened the door while faced the other way. I don't know what those women's intentions were, but if I couldn't hear the honk or horn, I'm not sure I hear screams either.